Suzanne Mehra, a bright-eyed young Indian immigrant, never imagined that seeking a new life in a foreign city would entangle her with Detective Richard Lawson, a 58-year-old veteran cop whose trusted reputation masked a dark obsession, an obsession that would turn deadly on Valentine's Day. For more than 30 years, the 58-year-old police officer had been a familiar figure in the city. His career began in his early 20s, back when the streets were quieter and the job demanded patience more than force. Over time, he earned a reputation for being calm under pressure and dependable during difficult situations. Younger officers often saw him as someone who knew how to survive the job without drawing attention to himself. He followed procedures closely, avoided controversy, and rarely spoke about his personal life. To the public, he was exactly what a long-serving officer was supposed to be. Outside of work, his life appeared just as controlled. After a divorce that happened years earlier, he chose to live alone in a modest house not far from the station. The separation had been clean and quiet, leaving no public arguments or legal drama. Friends slowly drifted away as his routine became more rigid. His days followed the same pattern: early mornings, long shifts, late dinners, and television playing in the background as he fell asleep on the couch. This predictable rhythm gave him a sense of order, but it also hid a growing emptiness he never addressed. As the years passed, retirement became a regular topic among his colleagues. Some looked forward to freedom, while others feared the silence that would follow. For him, the thought of stepping away from the badge was unsettling. The job had become his identity, the one place where he felt needed and respected. Without it, he worried there would be nothing left. This fear kept him working extra shifts and volunteering for tasks others avoided. Being busy helped him ignore the loneliness waiting for him at home. There were signs that something was missing, though few people noticed. He avoided family gatherings and skipped social events, often claiming exhaustion. When he did attend, he stayed quiet, watching others talk about their children, travels, and future plans. His own life felt frozen in time, unchanged for years. At night, memories of past choices surfaced, especially the moments when he could have taken a different path. Instead of dealing with regret, he buried it under responsibility and routine. His position gave him authority, and authority gave him a sense of control. On the streets, he knew how to command respect with a calm voice and firm presence. People listened to him, trusted him, and often thanked him for his help. This respect filled a void he refused to acknowledge. Over time, he began to rely on that feeling more than he realized. Being seen as reliable and strong became a replacement for genuine emotional connection. Behind closed doors, however, the uniform came off and the silence returned. The house felt too large for one person, yet too empty to feel like a home. He spent evenings scrolling through his phone, watching news clips and replaying old memories. There was no one waiting for him, no one asking about his day. This isolation slowly changed the way he thought. He began craving attention, not as an officer, but as a man who felt invisible once the shift ended. This quiet desperation set the stage for what came next. It made him vulnerable to choices he would have once avoided. The disciplined officer who followed rules without question was still there on the surface, but underneath, dissatisfaction was growing. The balance he had maintained for decades was weakening. Long before the affair began, the foundation of his life had already started to crack, preparing the way for a secret that would eventually lead to tragedy. The young Indian immigrant arrived with a mix of hope and fear that often follows people starting over in a new country. She had left behind familiar streets, family routines, and a life where she knew her place. In this new city, everything felt louder and faster. She worked long hours at a small job that barely paid enough, sharing a cramped apartment and saving whatever she could. Each day was focused on survival, learning rules she did not fully understand, and avoiding trouble at all costs. Being noticed by authorities was something she feared, not welcomed. Her first interaction with the police came during a minor incident that should have meant nothing. Paperwork, questions, and a short investigation placed her briefly under official attention. The older officer handled the situation calmly, explaining procedures and appearing patient in a way that felt reassuring. To her, he represented safety in an unfamiliar system. He spoke with confidence and certainty, qualities she lacked in her own life at that moment. What began as a formal encounter left a lasting impression on her, though she did not understand why at the time. As weeks passed, their paths crossed again under circumstances that seemed coincidental. Each meeting felt easier than the last. She began to see him as someone who understood the city, the laws, and the hidden rules she struggled to learn. He offered guidance that went beyond his duties, pointing her toward solutions and easing her worries. In a place where she felt invisible, this attention felt meaningful. It created a sense of connection that slowly replaced her initial caution. For the officer, she represented something entirely different. She was young, dependent, and new to the world he controlled with ease. Her uncertainty made him feel knowledgeable and important. He enjoyed being the person she relied on, the one who could solve problems and provide reassurance. The imbalance between them was clear, but it went unspoken. He was experienced and powerful, while she was still finding her footing. What seemed like kindness on the surface was layered with control beneath it. As their relationship shifted from casual contact to something more personal, secrecy became essential. She understood that his position made the situation risky, but emotional attachment often overrides logic. He insisted on discretion, framing it as protection for both of them. This explanation sounded reasonable to her, especially given her vulnerable status. She trusted his judgment, believing he knew best. Each hidden meeting strengthened her emotional investment, even as it isolated her further from others. Her life slowly began to revolve around him. Calls and messages became highlights in otherwise exhausting days. She imagined stability and support, something she had been chasing since her arrival. The age difference faded in her mind as she focused on the comfort he provided. She believed she had found someone who could offer security in a world that constantly reminded her she did not belong. What she did not see was how differently he viewed the situation. To him, the relationship existed outside reality, separate from his real life and responsibilities. He controlled when they met and how far things went. While she planned and hoped, he avoided thinking beyond the present moment. This difference in expectations quietly grew into a dangerous divide. By the time doubts began to surface, emotional dependence had already taken hold. She had invested trust in someone who held both personal and institutional power over her. The connection that once felt like a lifeline was now a trap she could not easily escape. Without realizing it, both were moving toward a point where secrecy, imbalance, and unspoken fears would collide, setting the stage for consequences neither could undo. As the relationship continued, the officer's life split into two separate worlds that never touched in public. At work, he remained steady and predictable, following routines that had defined him for decades. His colleagues noticed nothing unusual beyond a slight change in his habits. He volunteered for different shifts, avoided certain areas, and guarded his phone with unusual care. These small changes blended easily into the background of a demanding job, allowing his secret to stay hidden. In private, his behavior was less controlled. He checked messages obsessively and grew irritated when responses were delayed. The attention he once enjoyed now felt like a responsibility he could not escape. What had started as a source of excitement slowly became a burden. He feared exposure, not just because of professional consequences, but because his authority would instantly collapse. The thought of losing his reputation was more frightening than the moral weight of what he was doing. For the young woman, the relationship moved in the opposite direction. Her attachment deepened as her expectations grew clearer. She imagined progress and stability, believing the secrecy was temporary. Each promise of future clarity felt convincing enough to keep her invested. She adjusted her life around brief moments of contact, turning down opportunities and distancing herself from people who questioned her choices. Her world narrowed until almost everything depended on him. This imbalance began to show in subtle ways. She asked questions about where the relationship was heading and what would happen next. These questions made the officer uncomfortable. He avoided direct answers, offering reassurance without commitment. To him, The relationship existed in the present only, with no room for long-term consequences. He believed he could manage the situation through control and silence, just as he had managed countless problems on the job. As Valentine's Day approached, the pressure increased. The holiday carried expectations that could not be ignored. For her, it symbolized recognition and legitimacy. For him, it represented risk. He became more cautious, more distant, and more focused on keeping boundaries he had never clearly defined before. This shift confused and unsettled her. What once felt like closeness now felt uncertain and fragile. Stress began to affect his judgment. Years of enforcing rules had trained him to think strategically, but emotion disrupted that discipline. He worried about what she might do if she felt abandoned or exposed. Her immigration status, financial struggles, and emotional reliance weighed heavily on his thoughts. Instead of seeing her vulnerability as a reason to act responsibly, he viewed it as a potential threat to his carefully constructed life. At the same time, she sensed the distance growing. Doubt replaced trust, and fear replaced comfort. She began to realize how little control she had over the situation. Her dependence left her with few options and no clear way out. The secrecy that once felt protective now felt isolating. She was trapped between hope and anxiety, unsure whether to fight for the future she imagined or accept that it might never exist. The officer responded to this tension by tightening his control. He limited contact, set conditions, and avoided situations that felt unpredictable. Each attempt to contain the relationship only increased its intensity. The more he tried to manage it, the more unstable it became. His professional confidence could not solve a problem rooted in emotional imbalance and fear. By the time Valentine's Day was only days away, both were caught in a cycle they could not escape. Expectations clashed with denial, and dependence collided with self-preservation. The double life the officer had maintained for so long was beginning to collapse under its own weight. What remained was a fragile situation driven by secrecy, pressure, and desperation, moving steadily toward a moment where control would be lost and consequences would become unavoidable. Valentine's Day arrived like any other morning, quiet and unremarkable on the surface. The city streets were busy with routine commutes and hurried shoppers, unaware that in a modest suburban neighborhood, events were unfolding that would shock those involved forever. For the officer, the day was a test of nerves. He had spent the previous nights pacing his home, thinking about every possible scenario, every small misstep that could unravel the delicate balance he had maintained. What had once felt thrilling now carried the weight of fear and anticipation. The young woman had no idea how fragile the situation had become. She approached the day with hope, planning a moment of connection she imagined would cement their relationship. Her mind replayed small gestures and words from previous encounters, building a sense of security that felt real and achievable. She was unaware of the storm brewing in his mind or the decisions he was quietly preparing to make. To her, Valentine's Day symbolized promise and the possibility of clarity. As the day progressed, the tension between them became almost unbearable. Behind the officer's composed exterior was a man teetering on the edge of panic. He had calculated every past interaction, imagined every possible fallout, and yet nothing could prepare him for the intensity of what Valentine's Day demanded. Every message he sent was measured, every movement deliberate, but beneath the surface, instinct and fear guided his choices more than reason. When they finally met, the encounter was charged with emotion. The young woman carried hope and expectation, while he carried anxiety and dread. A misunderstanding or an unplanned gesture could tip the fragile balance in an instant. In a small, secluded place, their private world collided with reality. The power imbalance that had been quietly growing exploded in subtle, unpredictable ways. What had been a relationship of secrecy and control suddenly demanded confrontation, resolution, and, most importantly, silence. What happened next was sudden and violent, leaving marks that could never be erased. The crime scene later revealed signs of struggle, panic, and rushed decisions. Items were knocked over, personal belongings scattered, evidence of a desperate attempt to regain control over a situation that had slipped beyond management. The violence was not premeditated in the traditional sense, but it was the result of fear, imbalance, and the inability to handle intense emotional pressure. In a single, tragic moment, years of secrecy and tension erupted into irreversible consequences. Neighbors would later describe hearing nothing unusual, their morning routines continuing uninterrupted as tragedy unfolded behind closed doors. It was only when the aftermath became apparent that the severity of what had happened was revealed. Law enforcement officers responding to the scene were shocked. The man they had trusted to uphold the law had crossed a line that even experience could not excuse. The crime left a void that could never be filled and a trail of questions that demanded answers. For the young woman, the day that had begun with hope ended in finality. Her plans, her expectations, and her future were extinguished in a moment she could not have anticipated. For the officer, the act irreversibly shattered the life he had built over decades. Authority, respect, and reputation were instantly replaced with suspicion, investigation, and guilt. The uniform that had once been a shield now became a symbol of betrayal, a stark reminder that trust, once broken, leaves permanent scars. The events of Valentine's Day set off a chain reaction that extended far beyond the immediate participants. Investigators meticulously documented every detail, tracing the sequence of actions that led to violence. The emotional and psychological fallout extended to families, colleagues, and the community, leaving a sense of disbelief that someone so familiar and respected could commit such an act. What began as a private relationship became a public cautionary tale about the dangers of secrecy, obsession, and the consequences of blurred boundaries. By the end of the day, nothing could return to the way it had been. Valentine's Day, a day traditionally associated with love and connection, had transformed into a permanent marker of tragedy, fear, and loss. The choices made in moments of panic had long-term repercussions, illustrating how quickly life can shift from ordinary to catastrophic. In the quiet aftermath, the city was left to confront a reality that few were prepared to accept. Even the most trusted individuals can harbor secrets capable of destroying lives. The investigation that followed Valentine's Day was thorough and unrelenting, peeling back layer after layer of secrecy to reveal a story far more complex than anyone had imagined. Detectives worked tirelessly to reconstruct events, examining the crime scene for every possible clue. The once respected officer was suddenly under scrutiny, and his decades of service could not shield him from suspicion. Evidence pointed to a calculated, yet emotionally driven act, one that blurred the lines between premeditation and panic. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer it became that the situation had been building long before that fateful day. Digital footprints provided the first window into the hidden life he had maintained. Text messages, call logs, and social media interactions painted a picture of an obsession carefully masked as concern. Investigators traced patterns of contact, noting moments when he had meticulously controlled communication, steering conversations to ensure secrecy. Financial records and travel patterns further revealed how deeply the young woman's life had become entwined with his own. The balance of power was undeniable, and the evidence suggested that control, rather than love, had driven many of his decisions. Interviews with friends, colleagues, and neighbors added more pieces to the puzzle. On the surface, he had maintained professionalism and composure. Behind closed doors, however, his behavior revealed paranoia and manipulation. Friends noticed subtle changes, his withdrawal from social gatherings, unexplained absences, and an unusual preoccupation with details others considered minor. Neighbors recalled brief glimpses of the young woman, often hurried and tense, suggesting a life lived under the shadow of someone else's authority. These accounts reinforced the notion that the relationship had never been balanced, and that both emotional and practical control had rested entirely in his hands. The officer's position within law enforcement complicated the investigation. Many struggled to reconcile the image of a man sworn to protect with the evidence of someone capable of extreme personal betrayal. Professional boundaries had been crossed, and the public's trust was shattered. Media coverage intensified, and what was once a private tragedy became a symbol of the dangers inherent in unchecked authority. The badge that had represented respect and duty now served as a stark reminder of the potential for abuse hidden behind a trusted facade. The young woman's family, far away and unaware of the depths of the situation, struggled to understand what had happened. They pieced together information from fragmented reports and phone calls, attempting to reconcile the vibrant, hopeful person they knew with the victim revealed by investigators. Her life, filled with ambition and determination, had been cut short by forces beyond her control. The tragedy highlighted the vulnerability of immigrants, particularly those navigating unfamiliar systems, and the devastating consequences when trust is misplaced. As the investigation drew to a close, prosecutors faced the task of presenting a case that captured both the emotional and factual complexity of the crime. Every detail, from private correspondence to behavioral patterns, was used to demonstrate how a seemingly ordinary relationship escalated into fatal violence. The evidence left little doubt about accountability, yet it also raised profound questions about human psychology, power dynamics, and the capacity for darkness hidden beneath respectable appearances. In the aftermath, the community grappled with shock and disbelief. Conversations about authority, trust, and the signs of manipulation became widespread. The story served as a cautionary tale. Appearances can deceive, and even those who seem most reliable may harbor dangerous secrets. Law enforcement agencies reviewed protocols for professional conduct, recognizing the need for boundaries that could prevent similar tragedies in the future. Ultimately, the case underscored the fragile line between public respect and private transgression. The officer, once celebrated for decades of service, would forever be remembered for a single act of violence. The young woman, full of hope and potential, became a symbol of vulnerability and loss. Their intertwined fates left a lasting impact, a chilling reminder that secrets, obsession, and unaddressed desires can lead to irreversible consequences. In the end, justice focused not on titles or appearances, but on the actions that had destroyed two lives and left a community forever changed.